Kenny Waters spent 19 years behind bars. He was convicted of a murder in 1983. He said he was innocent, and thankfully, his sister Betty Ann believed him. For years, she fought the system and eventually won thanks to DNA testing. Here's their incredible story and journey.
I always thought the people who were in prison were guilty. I mean, and you used to hear people say, oh yeah, they all say they're innocent. I was one of those people that believed that. Not anymore. Kenny and I were very close growing up. We're 2 of 9, and Kenny is 1 year older than me. So we were best friends growing up. As a child, like we were kind of wild, but we had fun. We had a lot of fun. It was growing up with a lot of adventure in our life. I did not believe for 1 minute that he would be convicted. He said to me, Betty Ann, I cannot live in prison for something I didn't do. I'm not going to make it in here. I asked him, if I promise you I'll go back to school, you promise me you'll stay alive. And that became the promise, and that's how it all began. I moved back to Rhode Island and enrolled in a community college.
What's amazing about Betty Ann Waters is that she had such extraordinary determination. She'd been writing letters to us about her brother Kenny and about the possibility that a DNA test on blood at the crime scene could help prove his innocence. Once we heard that she'd found the evidence and we knew it was an appropriate and good case, you know, I immediately dived in and met with her. It's just really such an inspirational story.
This morning, for the first time in 19 years, Kenneth Waters did not wake up behind bars.
I think it's absolutely amazing that she's dedicated her life to this. It's been 19 years, and my whole family suffered unbelievable.
And we all love you.
And we're all just happy.
I'll never forget the feeling of walking out the doors into the air with him with me and jumping into a cab. It was just, I can't explain that feeling. It was, and I kept looking at him like, is this real? It didn't feel real. His months of freedom were fabulous. He was so happy.
We now welcome Dr. Kirk James from the University of Pennsylvania and the Gold Ring Reentry Initiative. Thanks for joining us for this discussion. Just an amazing story that we just heard, and we're seeing more and more folks behind bars that are being released because of DNA testing, and I just can't imagine what they're going through. Dr. Bart Rossi, if you could just explain to me just the psychology of what that must feel like when they finally find out that they've been released, and just the challenges that they face.
Well, I think the challenges are enormous, and I think these folks probably have a lot of what I call retained anger over time. You know, the anger collects and it builds, and they have to deal with that. And they really need some cognitive behavioral therapy, some treatment to help them. But what comes to mind to me on these cases, many situations, is that eyewitnesses have proven to be the worst evidence of all. And I find that really extraordinary, because people think that an eyewitness knows what he or she is seeing, but in fact, we know as psychologists it doesn't work that way. They're often wrong. Eyewitness
misidentification,
yes.
And perjury is the second one.
Yeah.
Dr. James, talk to me about some of your work, and talk to me about some of the folks that you've seen that have been released, and some of their personal stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very challenging for anyone being released from prison. I mean, we look at what the numbers, you know, Department of Justice reports that within 3 years, 3/4 of people that are released from prison, which is almost 700,000, end up back in prison within 3 years. So that shows just like the tremendous challenge it is for them systematically, and you know, also you spoke about the cognitive process as well. We can't think that anyone who goes through the prison system isn't like deeply impacted by that.
Well, talk about when folks come out, and as we saw in that story, they're cleared,
yes,
but their records many times are not cleared. How do you go about clearing a record?
Well, you know, that depends. There's a couple different ways, and it depends on the state. If you get a pardon from the governor's office or whatever, that's supposed to wipe the whole thing clean. A lot of them don't get that. You can expunge your record, and that will also remove it permanently. If you just have it sealed, then it's sealed in a separate thing, and it is available. So there's no uniformity from state to state as to how that's done. Yes. Ideally, I guess there should be some kind of federal uniformity thing, but then it's up to each state to to hasten that. So when the person does get released, it's incumbent, I think, upon the judge or the prosecutor to say, okay, this is the procedure, let's get this done as quickly as possible or whatever, and that quick follow through. But I think there tends to be a lag by the time that happens or whatever. So
and I know you've interviewed something like 4,000 inmates in your time.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, statistically, it's a small percentage. I think it's like between 2.3 and 5% of the population that shouldn't be there, and none of them should be there. But you know, any system run by human beings, there's going to be some element of error, and you know, the goal is to try and minimize that.
We're seeing more and more people because of DNA.
Absolutely, but I almost feel the people that are able to be exonerated by DNA, they're the fortunate ones, right? There's so many other individuals that are incarcerated, and they're incarcerated due to maybe policies of the justice system, and these are things. This is like maybe you know, beneath the iceberg, so to speak, that we're not seeing. So for instance, a few years ago, we saw the Central Park Six. They were exonerated after years of spending in prison, right? And they actually signed confessions. And you know, what was overlooked in this conversation was that the confessions were coerced by the justice system. You know, these guys were actually felt very pressured by the police to sign confessions. And there's a lot of individuals that go through the criminal justice system that actually feel very pressured to sign confessions just to, you know, whether it's for time served, you know, or whether it's to actually go and do time. But they're, you know, because what they're facing is so substantial. They may be facing 10 years in prison, and after sitting in prison for 6 months, you know, their legal aid attorney, because they cannot afford attorney, tells them, hey, listen, we just got a plea for you for 6 months, time served. An individual is going to take that plea, whether they're innocent or guilty, because they feel that they have no other choice. And I feel there's so many other individuals that are in the system that we're not talking about.
And also to highlight exactly what we're talking about, a lot of prosecutors don't really even want the DNA to come in. We've had prosecutors who don't want it to come in, and I say as a psychologist, why? Why would they? And the answer to that is they don't want to be wrong. They really don't want their case to go south. They don't want it to go the other way. So the whole psychology of the prosecutor and what their views and how it's going to impact them comes into the picture.
I don't know what's more infuriating, to see the wrongfully convicted in jail or hardened criminals out on the streets. I mean, so.
And I mean, to even look at the criminal justice system in a bigger light, right? So I looked at, for my dissertation, I looked at the history of the criminal justice system in America. And honestly, it's never worked. It's a system that's very flawed. It's a system that's predominantly played on poor people of color. It's never actually impacted our recidivism rate, meaning that people coming out of prison are actually worse off than when they go in. So I think, you know, I hope Trayvon Martin can be the tipping point for us to really kind of reevaluate the criminal justice system. Because I feel like it's very sad that we're constantly putting this faith in a system that historically, you know, evidence has showed that it doesn't work.
And you know, in the criminal justice system, controlled dangerous substance, CDS, is on almost every other file in the prison system. Well, why don't we take these folks out of jail and get them treatment for addiction problems and substance problems? It would cost less, and it would probably be much more effective than all of these people.
Well, the numbers are growing, and this certainly has to become a national dialogue, because the numbers, as the DNA becomes more sophisticated, more people are being cleared. So we're seeing that when we're seeing those numbers go up. What are the states offering now? I know Wyoming was leading the charge in offering the most amount of money, but what can states do now?
You mean, well, all right. Well, when you say what can states do, I wanted to just back up for a minute, and I don't know the whole national picture, but in New Jersey, reentry, we are taking some positive steps. I just met with the Commissioner of Corrections in New Jersey. They're emphasizing the reentry stage or whatever. We offer drug courts to anybody pending court now on drug charges. So every court in New Jersey now has a drug court. So they're going to give them the opportunity for drug rehab before they go to prison, because they can get drugs in prison. Let's face the reality of that. So let's try and, you know, clear up the need for the drug first before we send them, you know, to prison.
So there's actually a drug court now.
Oh yeah, every county in New Jersey now has a drug court, and other states are starting to do that. So that's a positive thing for reentry. There's some educational grants and some vocational grants that they're imposing. The prison population in New Jersey has been reduced from 28,000 to 24,000. You know, so the emphasis is now, again, in this state and probably a few others. It's not a national trend, but I think you know, New Jersey could be used as an example for some of these issues with reentry.
Dr. James?
I feel that, you know, we're focusing a lot on reentry, right? But we could be a lot more progressive. So for instance...
So if you can make the changes...
Absolutely. So for instance, I think drug courts are necessary. I think that we're criminalizing a social issue that needs to be addressed in a social platform, not a criminal platform. So I don't think that, you know, if you look at, for instance, countries that's taken a decriminalization approach to drugs like Portugal, or you don't see the pervasiveness of drug use that you see in America, right? And as a result, you don't see the amount of people in prison as you see in America. America has more people in prison than any other nation in the world, right? The second thing is this: the majority of people that are incarcerated in the United States have low to no education, and we're actually taking money out of inner city neighborhoods that, you know, need schools, that need funding. So we already know that, you know, by taking away money from something that has actually been shown, if it's in place, will reduce, you know, people actually committing crimes because it creates greater opportunities. So I just feel that, you know, reentry is a part of it. You know, we definitely need to make sure that, you know, people that go to prison, they have opportunities to successfully transition out of prison. But we also need to be more proactive in kind of looking at some of these things that actually contribute to people going to prison.
Mental health. What about mental health?
Absolutely.
It's a terrible situation in prison. The mental health position in each jail is very limited. Very limited mental health. Really good mental health services for prisoners who need that. Not necessarily people who are psychotic, but many people have personality problems. They could get help and they could become more effective citizens. But without treatment, where do they go?
Well, in this case also, I want to talk about when somebody who's been wrongfully convicted gets out, and so many times they try and get jobs, and their records keep showing that they were in jail. And so how do we clear that up with all these new people that will be soon to be getting out?
Well, again, it varies from state to state, but in some states there's a financial retribution for anybody who spent time in jail by mistake or whatever. So in other words, you're in jail for 10 years, maybe $15,000 or $20,000 a year that you are compensated. Now, that's not in every state, so that varies. They also can file a civil suit and get some kind of financial, you know, thing. Ideally, there should be some type of follow-up counselor for a period of time to help that person, you know, with jobs and education in the community. And so that's, I think, where it's lacking. You know, so we made the mistake and had them in prison for 10 years. Open the door and letting it, that's not enough. You have to do some kind of follow-up, really.
Appreciate everybody's comments. We are going to take a quick break right now, and when we return, we're going to take a trip to the heartland of America, where one of the biggest cities in the U.S. has just announced it's filing for bankruptcy. What's it mean for the city and the nation? We'll talk about that when Fresh Outlook returns.